Morphic Resonance was, I think, made 6 years ago, 2014, 2015. The idea was it's a rammed earth sculpture that will be at the park for 6 months. I think that was the length of the exhibition. But I think everybody that goes to Narok know that the children really love the sculpture, so the only way to move it is to actually destroy it. So I decided with Benji Lehman to rather leave it and see what the material does, because it's in a material that's sort of not permanent. It's not bronze or a stone. It's compacted earth mixed with a stabilizer, and mixed into it is Belfast gabbro and thatch and small pieces of pebble and to give it texture. So the sculpture remained and is still sitting so many years later, but it's The exhibition Deduct was 2006 at University of Johannesburg's gallery. There was two reasons why this exhibition was important. One was it was a non-commercial space with a very generous amount of room available for large sculpture, and also the curator, Annelie Dempsey, was somebody that I knew personally. She worked alongside my father as a journalist decades before that, so I felt more at home in the space than I would have otherwise. I wanted to work with Belfast gabbro for many years, but this allowed me to work to a scale that I didn't do before because of the space allowance that I could show the work in. It was before I carved the stone and many other things I do now, but I basically drilled the stone and constructed it to a central inside steel frame, or stacked it with steel running through it. And I think this method created a beautiful simplification of an idea and a stylization that I'm still very fond of. The idea with calling it the sculpture Deduct was to point to, of course, the opposite of induction. So you don't work from the specific to the general. Here you have to work from the general, the collective amount of stones, to the specific, the sculpture, the figure. So you have to understand and look at all the stones to understand one central idea. And if you think about modern life and the world and how we tend to simplify really complex dilemmas, I think it's a good counterbalance to that practice. The materials I use is something, I think, in a big way that differentiates me from other artists. It comes from a conversation I had with somebody in New York when I was about 30, where I realized if I want to contribute to the conversation of art, I should do so with concepts that I understand, that's taught to me first and from my environment. And if I can speak using language from my environment, meaning using natural materials specific to where I'm from, it should differentiate the work and make it more individualistic than, let's say, casting bronze or importing Carrara marble or whatever. So I started experimenting with different ways of constructing or modeling or making sculpture from either thatch or wood or stone or rammed earth. And I was also toying with the idea that sculpture is always laborious, it's always costly to make, and therefore it's not something you can easily gift to, let's say, a school or university, because it would cost you too much to gift it. It would be hundreds of thousands of rands if it's bronze. But if you rammed earth together within a mold, so you take soil with a stabilizer, stone, and other elements in it, you dampen the material, then you compact it into a specifically created negative mold and leave it to harden, and then remove the mold and finish the surface, you have a fairly inexpensive sculpture. Stabilizer is expensive, but the soil is dirt. It also allows you to make green sculpture. So you can travel to, let's say, Namibia with a mold and some stabilizer, I've done that once where I went there with, let's say, 3 tons and I left 15 tons of sculpture. Similar with Morphic Resonance, it's a sculpture that weighs at the end about 4 tons. But we went there with a small vehicle with our mold and our stabilizer, and collected soil and stone and rammed it on site. With Deduct, the constructed stone sculpture, I thought I would love to work with the material, not because of the cost implications necessarily, because stone per se is cheaper maybe to buy than bronze, but the logistical movement of the weight and the technical difficulty of working the material, the hardness of it, makes it costly. But the material is a conveyor of meaning in its own sense. So if you work with stone, Belfast Gabbro for instance, the stone is 2 billion years old, and it's from the Bushveld complex, which is the largest igneous complex ever on Earth that we know of. And this stone most probably came out on the surface because the crystals are so fine, so it's extrusive, and that was 2 billion years ago. And now I can pick it up and carve it and construct it and put it together, and you feel in a way privileged that you're allowed to work with something of such profound isness. In the Western world, isness is maybe not a concept we'll be familiar with, but the stone is something in itself before you start working with it. It's not nothing. It had history. It's a tangible marker of a time way back when. So it's a wonderful material for me to work with. I prefer that above anything else. Public art has been an interest of mine since the start of getting involved in sculpture per se. My father was a journalist and he wrote to the broader public. And we had many conversations about the audience you choose. Who do you speak to? Do you speak to the select few that might understand you if you're speaking about really complex concepts, or do you speak to the man on the street? And if you speak, how do you speak? What do you talk about? And he said to me once that I must realize that newspapers are something that's fleeting and thrown away and not appreciated or shelved or put into libraries. But if you make sculpture, whatever you say will keep on saying what you were saying. So if you talk rubbish or you lie, you're going to keep on lying for very long. So it's important to consider what you want to say when you make public sculpture. Now, public sculpture of old, or public art proper, is the hero on the horse. It's the guy with a sword or a gun going off to kill somebody else. Or it's a political statement, or sometimes it's a commercial statement, or it's propaganda for a church or other religious institution. So public art has often been used by mankind to stake claim or plant flags or whatever. So to go against that and make an anti-monument, I enjoy immensely. As artists mostly do, to go against the grain gives us great joy. So it gives me great joy to make an anti-monument, something, and through the, let's say, rammed earth sculpture, speak of our transience, our vulnerability, our ineffectiveness. And taking a 5.4 meter figure in Morphic Resonance, which is the height of the David statue, and pressing him down that he sits on his bum in close contact with earth, and now only being 2.4 meters tall. With the Deduct sculptures, the stonework, I like leaving the cracks and the imperfections and showing the bolts and the way of constructing, because it's an honest way of showing how it was produced. But it doesn't portray dominance or grandeur. It's more, for me, a recognition of our stupidity, our vulnerability, our brokenness, our attempt to be formidable. But being formidable as a human figure with stone that's 2 billion years old is quite ironic. So yeah, there's many thoughts about the anti-monument, and going against public art proper in the work that I make. I don't always conceive sculpture with a specific location, because often I have exhibitions and the work will go out on consignment and then sold and moved to wherever. It is, however, fantastic if you have the opportunity to go to a specific landscape or cityscape and conceptualize something specifically for that. Then the dialogue between what you work with in composition, material, might be a better conversation with whatever else is around it. Sometimes when sculpture is bought and placed, it's surprisingly successful, but there has been occasions where it might not work as well as what you wanted it to. But you know, the sculptures can move in general. With Morphic Resonance, the idea was to make something that you can't move. It was actually made in a way to go against the grain and against the market. So if I make it, it's made in situ. You can't pick it up, put it on a truck, sell it and move it. It has to be remade. So in a way, if I don't agree, I say I don't agree that sculpture must be here, which is, in a way, gives me control about where it's placed. Not that I'm a control freak, it's just there's a certain continuity with the piece and me then. My larger work relates in a way to the environment that I'm in. I spoke earlier about a conversation I had with somebody in New York about 20 years ago. I also realized that I must try to identify what it is that I have that others might not have. Meaning, if I make art, what gives me a benefit? I'm not an artist living in London and I don't have all the wonderful exhibitionings and theatre and other stimulating events around me, but I do have a natural landscape. I do have natural materials available. I do have a climate that allows me to work outside throughout the whole year where I won't freeze, so I don't need to heat my studio. I can work with people and translate skill to them and create an endeavor where I become part of a community and together we achieve certain goals. In DSW, my studio, we're almost like a little soccer or rugby team trying to win the league or whatever. And there's an energy amongst the collective of people working with you. So there's many things you have in South Africa that you don't have elsewhere. And because of the space and the climate and the materials, I can work large. But I also grew up loving visual art, and my mother, being an artist or a painter, had art books that I paged through often, so I fell in love with some sculpture, let's say that of Marino Marini. And a lot of these were smaller bronzes of equestrian sculpture with textures and carved into the metal and chiseled into blocks for texture. And I remember this as a kid, from really small, looking at these, and as you grow up, you look at these, and you want to do that. So it allows you a different conversation, it allows you a different way of expressing. It's smaller, it's in your hands, you can control it, you can put it in the space where you live. While the larger sculpture, we need large spaces or large gardens or outdoor spaces to place it. So it's just another, I think it's another conduit or a channel to work through. Well, DSW is a studio that I started when I was still studying in 1996. So we turn 25 this year. I didn't want to do art. Let me just first start there. My parents were bohemian creatives and I just thought, enough of that, I want a normal life, but I couldn't help myself. So at the end I studied art. And I knew I have to get some way to get an income, because as a young artist leaving varsity, first of all you young, 26, what do you have ready to share with the world yet of any wisdom? Your skill base might be established, but it's not refined. So you still need many years of practice and training before you'll make things of excellence, hopefully, make things of excellence. So in the meantime, what will you do? So I started running a foundry in my final year when I studied, because I had to pay my own way, and that was a way of funding myself. And when I finished, the lovely couple who owned it, the Struves, gave me the foundry. So I had an oven and a grinder, and I had one guy that worked with me, who had more experience in bronze casting than what I did. And systematically, the studio grew and grew. And I took in commissions that many academically trained artists would frown upon. But I looked at commissions as opportunity to train myself up. So if a casino would come and say, make us a 5-meter sculpture, I would think, well, when my mother studied, they painted Van Gogh and Vermeer, whatever, to study. We don't do it anymore. We don't train ourselves up in that way. But if I have to copy a sculpture for some institution, I can travel abroad, go through the whole practice and learn from it. So in one of those years, I think I used 8 tons of clay. And that's practice that goes into your practice. So the studio grew systematically over the quarter of a century to what it is now. At one stage, we had a staff of 47 people. My partner, Rina Stutzer, and myself both made large sculpture that year. We're now down to a team of 17 people, but all specialists and all people with a certain openness to learning. The dynamic between the people are fantastic. Our experiences, we've been doing this for so long. So the mold maker, for instance, had been making molds for 25 years, and he's a good, excellent mold maker. And so is the metal chasers, and so is the guy working with wax. So it's a team of people where we don't have to really negotiate or speak a lot. If a sculpture is made, I don't have to express how it must be molded, or even how it must be finished in metal. They know certain things to be finished with hand files and sandpaper, and larger things where you can go to it with power tools. So the team is a very specialized group of individuals that I've been fortunate enough to work with for this period of time. It's not often that you can build relationships and friendships in a community and create things together for such a long time. I think our benefit is we create things and we really like what we do. So the motivation isn't hard to, you don't have to stimulate it. The motivation is there by just the nature of that what we do daily. As a foundryman, looking at what we do in South Africa, or actually just as a sculptor, as somebody that appreciates sculpture, the practice of making things three-dimensional. The world is changing, we all know it. You know, certain skills are out the door and the paradigm is shifting. And you can get sad about it, you can get worked up about it, but it's not going to change anything. The world is changing. It is sad, though, that we lose knowledge of excellence and things we have achieved in the past, looking for something new that might not be any better. It is sad that we don't transfer the skill from masters of old to younger people that want to take up the skill. There's many things that's sad about the modern world to me. As South Africans, we play rugby and have braaivleis at home. We don't go to museums. So we don't know the difference between an oil painting, acrylic painting, a bronze sculpture, or sometimes even between a sculpture made in metal or sculpture made in stone, or sculpture made in a subservient bad material like resin or faux marble or faux bronze or whatever. So our information, but that is, you know, the broader public. The select few that like sculpture, I think there's people that still recognize craft and skill. the masters of old, like Egon Gunther and people like that could look at a millimeter of bronze and know almost the density and the porosity of the cast. I think those masters are lost. And then the younger generations, I've been teaching university for 27, 28 years. I don't really see people coming up in the younger generation looking at those skills, wanting to specialize in it. I must also mention that if you look at the broader culture and you look at artisan bread and barista coffees and all the other individualistic craft beer, and where we want to go back to something handmade by an individual that we can appreciate. So I think the pendulum has swung. Maybe it's swung too far into mass-produced, and where you have a book titled The Art of Not Making. I think that was my worst. And it might swing back to where we appreciate something well made. So let's hope for that. My local influences would be, when I was at high school, I collected the drawings of William Kentridge. I collected the sculptures I could get a visual reference of Andries Botha or Boet Botha. Then once on a trip where I sold drawings on a flea market in Johannesburg, I saw an exhibition of Diane Victor, and I was lucky enough that when I went to university she was actually a lecturer of mine, the best lecturer I ever had. They were great influences, but that's mostly, Kentridge and Diane was only two-dimensional at that stage. William Kentridge didn't make sculpture then. Also at university, to counterbalance the conceptual drive and not to make work and invest in the material and all those ideas, that somewhat depressed me because I like sculpture. I used to go sit in front of David Brown's work at the Pretoria Art Museum Voyage 2. This was a work similar to that of Bregel, with the crazy figures on a boat, on a vessel somewhere. They don't know where they're going, and whilst they're going, they damage everything, themselves and everything around them, a bit like mankind. And so that's local. International, we had this book on Marino Marini that I paged through as a kid, and I couldn't stop paging through it. And it grew with me as I grew older and larger. And it actually opened up into just a larger space for my mind. It never closed in. So the more I know, the more I understand how profound the work was. And then as you travel and you go see the biennales and documentas and things, it's fantastic. But I do believe that one should not look at other people's art so much. You should stimulate yourself through reading, very wide, physics, history, science, whatever, poetry. And then through engaging with your material in your studio and your processes, your method, develop something of authentic self and communicating everything that fed into you. When we travel, Rena and myself, she also teaches, we often visit tertiary institutions to see what the work looks like in a university in China or Japan or Vancouver or wherever. And it's sad if you don't see any local influence, if you don't see any regionality, and it all looks the same, because everybody's on the net looking at pictures. And it becomes karaoke, and it's not really, you can't see where it's from. In a way that bothers me. I don't feel that I have to make South African sculpture. But as I said earlier, I can't make propaganda of order because I'm a South African and I'm totally familiar with disorder. So if I make a work, I should have both in it, order and disorder, continuity and discontinuity. And I think people looking at the work understand then this person is familiar with that sort of landscape, wherever that is. But it's not Finland. My dream commission, I think I have had some dream commissions where I was approached by somebody to say, here's a space in a garden make what you want to make. And there is no budget. But you know, don't be ridiculous, but there is no budget. I've often had that, where I made work for people, where I was allowed to do the best I could do. And that relationship is crucial to the growth of an artist. Without that patron supporting the arts and allowing a person to make what they feel they should make, then maybe they never make it. And if they make it, maybe it's not good, and then they can go beyond it. Maybe they make it and discover something that we all will appreciate. So the Dream Commission is I think, the first time somebody says to you, okay, I've got this place on my wall, what do you want to make? What do you want to draw? And you have the opportunity to express, and you know, if I spend time on this, I will receive something to pay for my rent, and I can buy bread or whatever, so I'm okay. So I can now spend time and put all my energy without stressing. And without that relationship between the artist and the patron, the arts can't really develop. So if you look at history, you look at whatever, from Egyptian times through to Michelangelo, without support, without the patrons, there's no resource. Sculpture is really, as an endeavor, expensive. And if you want to work on a certain scale, it's impossible to do it on your own drive. So without the right connection to the market economy, the right galleries, the right patrons, then the gift economy cannot function. Although the market economy it's a necessary secondary engagement, it's not the primary thing why you make what you make. So without the gallery or the patron, the artist or the sculptor finds himself in a cul-de-sac.